Political consultants and the pundit class are eating their words tonight after one of the most sensational come-from-behind victories by a presidential candidate since Harry Truman won re-election in 1948. Ellen Wilson has been re-elected, defeating Democratic nominee Jerry Brown, and will become the first openly gay person to be elected president of the United States. This is indeed a historic occasion. But just how did she pull it off? Just 1 year ago, her tenure in the White House appeared to be drawing to a close after she admitted she was homosexual on national television. The Republican Party quickly turned its back on her, with serious talk of impeachment heard in the halls of the Capitol building for the first time in over 100 years. Political consultant Mike Murphy believes Wilson planted the seeds for a comeback the very night she made her stunning admission. She had the guts to stand up before the American people and tell the truth, says Murphy. But the real turnaround began in the wake of the bombing of the Johnson Space Center last year. Wilson struck the right balance between compassion for the victims and a steely-eyed determination to catch and punish the perpetrators. Wilson faced a tough challenge in the Republican primary when her former Vice President James Bragg mounted a relentless, extremely negative campaign against her. But Wilson still managed to win her party's nomination by a razor-thin margin, and many in the political world looked to the moment she was endorsed by her Secretary of State George H.W. Bush as a key turning point, and she later chose Bush as her vice presidential running mate. A political moderate with extensive foreign policy experience, Bush's endorsement provided many other moderate Republicans with the political cover they needed to support Wilson. In the last weeks of the campaign, Wilson was able to also convince moderates and conservative Democrats to vote for her, many of whom felt the Democratic nominee Jerry Brown was too far to the left.
In Brussels today, President Ellen Wilson and Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev scored a diplomatic triumph when, together with their partner nations, they signed a new treaty, founding what is being called the Mars 7 Alliance. The agreement aims to end the competition and distrust that has historically characterized the space race and usher in a new era of cooperation and partnership. The treaty is a personal triumph for President Wilson, who made it the top priority of her second term. The members of the M7 Charter include the European Space Agency, a coalition of Western European nations like the United Kingdom, France, and West Germany, as well as the CCCS, or Coalition of Communist Countries for Spaceflight, made up of states aligned with the Soviets, such as Yugoslavia, Cuba, Turkey, and Mexico. The other three founding members of the M7 are Japan, India, and North Korea. Missing from the new alliance are two other prominent space powers, China and Canada, which have decided to remain independent so as to pursue their own priorities in space. As part of the agreement, the M7 nations have together agreed to contribute hundreds of billions of dollars to an expansion of Happy Valley Base as it transitions from a research station to an industrial mining facility staffed by hundreds of astronauts and cosmonauts. The beleaguered Helios Corporation, which has struggled to find its footing since the departure of its founder, Dev Ayesa, and the death of CFO Karen Baldwin, also received a much-needed shot in the arm when it secured the contract to become the sole company charged with expanding the infrastructure of Happy Valley Base. The company had been in financial turmoil ever since the Supreme Court ruled that Helios's exclusive government contracts to mine helium-3 on the moon constituted an antitrust violation. Other major energy companies, such as Exxon, Shell, and Halliburton, quickly secured rights to mining on the moon, dramatically reducing Helios's profits. But CEO Hilliard made an adept pivot to Mars, which appears to have paid off handsomely.
The rusty wheels of justice turn slowly in this country, my friends, but every once in a while they deliver. Today, two of the depraved extremists behind the bombings of the Johnson Space Center 3 years ago were convicted in a Houston courtroom. The jury found 56-year-old Hal Goodman guilty of 3 counts of conspiracy and 195 counts of first-degree murder. Goodman faces a possible death penalty for his crimes. Goodman's 29-year-old co-conspirator, Sonny Hall, was also convicted of 2 counts of conspiracy and 195 counts of first-degree murder. And she also faces the death penalty, but her attorneys intend to fight for life in prison, citing her young age and lack of criminal history. Lack of criminal history. She murdered 195 people. During the trial, James Stevens, the youngest son of famed astronauts Gordon and Tracy Stevens, testified against the defendants. Stevens, who also participated in the bombing, struck a plea bargain agreement with prosecutors last year and was sentenced to just 12 years in prison and a measly $200,000 fine. Missing from the proceedings was the group's ringleader, Charles Burnitz, a former astronaut who died in the blast. Burnitz served with James Stevens' parents on the moon and apparently used that relationship to manipulate Stevens into joining his cause. Sonny Hall claims she was also brainwashed by Burnitz, but the jury rightly showed little sympathy for her. President Ellen Wilson issued a statement from the White House saying that while today's verdict would not bring back the lives lost in the tragedy, it does bring a measure of justice. And today's verdict has allowed the president to claim she brought the perpetrators to justice. Whatever else you think about Wilson and her policies, her leadership in the wake of the bombing brought our country together when it was most needed. And I, for one, remain grateful.
Earlier today, the Mars transport ship Unity set a new speed record for manned spaceflight as it streaked toward Mars at more than 100,000 miles per hour. Operated by Helios Aerospace, Unity achieves such high velocities by using a nuclear fusion reactor to expel superheated plasma. This will enable the spaceship to reach Mars in just 31 days. That's 3 times faster than the previous record holder, Sojourner 3. Helios CEO Richard Hilliard called their plasma propulsion technology a, quote, game changer because missions will no longer have to wait for the so-called Mars window when the red planet is closest to Earth. Plasma-powered ships can now launch anytime Helios chooses to send them. Helios plans to build a second plasma-powered ship, which will enable it to send hundreds of astronauts, cosmonauts, and skilled laborers to Mars by the end of the year. Each vessel will be more than 300 feet long and able to transport about 100 metric tons of cargo and 50 astronauts to Mars. Gone is the era when astronauts had to cram into glorified sardine cans, unable to shower or find any privacy for days or weeks at a time. The new crew quarters feature private cabins, zero-gravity showers, communal areas, and exercise facilities. The increased ability to send cargo and manpower to Mars will enable Happy Valley's rapid expansion as it shifts to a large-scale mining operation, planning to extract precious metals and resources from nearby asteroids. The vast mineral wealth of the asteroid belt has recently been corroborated by the promising results from the OSIRIS-REx sample return mission to the asteroid Bennu and other robotic exploration missions. NASA scientists believe asteroids in the vicinity of Mars may contain platinum, silver, and a wealth of other precious minerals. As a result, the discovery of these valuable resources could spark a new era of space exploration and commercial mining akin to a modern-day gold rush in outer space.
What a night it has been. The results are still coming in, but Al Gore is just 20 electoral college votes away from the presidency. Now, it has been a close race, with Vice President George H.W. Bush taking most of the southern and midwestern states, while Gore won the West Coast, the upper Midwest, and the industrial East, with the notable exception of Pennsylvania, which has been moving back and forth between Bush and Gore all night. Now, another key battleground that has changed hands throughout the night was Florida. Those of you that have been watching know that this network and most others declared Gore the winner of the Sunshine State just before polls closed in the Florida Panhandle, which has traditionally been a Republican enclave. But as votes continued to come in from those Panhandle districts, Bush began to narrow the gap, and the networks, including this one, withdrew their predictions. Now the results are in, and it's clear that Gore has beaten Bush by just over 1,000 votes. Earlier in the evening, Florida's Secretary of State Katherine Harris, who doubled as co-chair of the Bush campaign in the state, said she wouldn't require overseas ballots to be postmarked by Election Day. This move caused most pundits to predict Gore would lose Florida because most of those overseas votes were from members of the armed forces who traditionally favor Republicans. Leaders within Florida's Democratic Party believe a major factor in Gore's surprise victory was his involvement in the Elian Gonzalez case. Elian Gonzalez was the 5-year-old Cuban refugee who survived a harrowing journey across the Caribbean to Florida, while his mother and 11 other refugees drowned. A bitter custody battle then unfolded between the boy's father in Cuba and his paternal relatives in Miami. Many believe the Wilson administration's handling of the Gonzalez case was a low point in her presidency. Political consultant Pat Buchanan has said the rule of law is important to Republican voters, but the refusal to intervene on behalf of Elian Gonzalez against Castro's cronies was politically tone-deaf and cost Bush dearly with the Cuban vote. Al Gore, on the other hand, displayed great skill by cobbling together a coalition of Democrats and Republicans in the House and Senate to grant Gonzalez citizenship. And tonight, Cuban voters in Florida have rewarded him for his efforts. We are just getting word right now that the precincts in Allegheny County have reported in, and Eagle News is officially calling Pennsylvania for Gore. This is going to give him 23 electoral college votes and 50,999,897 popular votes, more than enough to put him over the top, making Al Gore the 42nd president of the United States. Yes, that's right, folks. You heard me correctly. Al Gore has been elected our 42nd president.
The Paris of the East, that is what many observers are calling Moscow these days, after Mikhail Gorbachev's so-called economic miracle of glasnost and perestroika has transformed the once dour Russian capital into a city of light and even ostentatious wealth. Other Soviet cities, Leningrad, Minsk, and Kiev, to name a few, have attracted major corporate investments and world-class retailers such as Hugo Boss, Chanel, Harry Winston Jewelers, and Bergdorf Goodman. The unprecedented economic boom has been driven by advances in the tech sector brought about by the ever-expanding Soviet space program, and also by the USSR's profitable exports of precious metals such as iridium and lithium, key ingredients in the batteries that power many electric cars in the post-fossil fuel economy. But not all Russians are happy with these changes. A rising disparity between those at the top of the economic ladder and those at the bottom has fueled resentment of these new oligarchs' opulent lifestyles. Conservative critics within the Soviet Union claim that the nation has lost touch with its socialist roots and opened the door to the, quote, evils of capitalism. Fyodor Krashenko, a member of the Politburo and a fierce political enemy of Gorbachev, has accused the growing middle and upper classes of Soviet citizenry of cozying up to Western capitalists, claiming they are no longer loyal to the Soviet Union and have betrayed the working class principles of Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin. He has called on Gorbachev to rein in these new entrepreneurs or face dire consequences. Sources close to the president dismiss the threat as grandstanding for the upcoming parliamentary elections. But others worry Gorbachev may not have room to maneuver should there be an economic downturn. Supplies of iridium and lithium have been rapidly dwindling, which could put a strain on a vital source of income for the nation. A failure to diversify its larger economy may leave the USSR more vulnerable than Western countries if a recession were to strike, though Warren Buffett is quick to point out that the Soviet Union still retains much of the largest crude oil reserves in the world should the energy sector pivot back to fossil fuels.